We've been listening to the president, but just a short time ago, he announced the grounding of the 737 MAX 8 fleet. I want to bring in CBS News transportation correspondent Kris Van Cleave, who's been covering this story the past few days and joins us now. Kris, what does this mean as far as implementation?
Well, it means as soon as any of the MAX jets that are in the air right now land at their destination, they are going to be grounded. Most likely what that means is they'll be grounded for passengers. The airlines typically are allowed to ferry them back to sort of their home base, if you will, but that'll be done without passengers. So essentially, anyone flying on a MAX plane right now will be allowed to get to their destination. After that, these planes are going to be parked until this investigation gets some clarity as to what the issue may have been. You may be wondering what changed. Why did the FAA go from saying that they had no basis to ground the planes to deciding to ground them? Well, we learned about some new satellite data from the Canadians today when they made just a few hours ago made the decision to ground the MAX up in Canada. And this new satellite data gives a little bit clearer picture of the flight path, if you will, of this Ethiopian plane. And evidently there are some similarities, enough similarities, with what happened to the Lion Air flight back in October that warranted the Canadians and now the FAA to go ahead and take this step to ground the airplane. Now, that's still not enough to say the same thing that went wrong on the Lion Air plane went wrong on the Ethiopian plane. We just don't know that, and we don't know it, quite frankly, because the black boxes that were recovered nearly 3 days ago still haven't been analyzed.
Kris, I want to show you what we have right now. This is the FlightAware Map. These are all the 737 MAX 8 planes right now in this moment that are above U.S. airspace. And as you reported, they are now going to their final destination. Well, they will be placed out of commission. Kris, you're reporting you've cited that 39 countries, including the EU, have all taken this fleet out of service before. Just the U.S. and Canada were the only two major countries that had it. Why did it take them so much longer to do this?
Well, so if you're the U.S. and you have a system that has been responsible for the safest period of aviation in the United States history, you trust in your system and your methods. And the FAA simply had no data to support a systemic problem or the potential of a systemic problem that could justify grounding the aircraft. Now, that has changed today. But yesterday, what you had was data from 3 U.S. carriers, more than 100,000 flight hours, where they had never seen indications of this system that may have malfunctioned in Lion Air occurring in the U.S. You had a history of safe operation. You had the pilots standing behind the aircraft and the airlines staying behind the aircraft. The FAA certified this airplane. They should know more about it than any other regulatory agency in the world. So I think it was a thought to trust the system, and when there was data, to make an informed decision to make it.
You talk about trusting the system. There were also complaints that pilots had safety issues, and they had voiced their complaints. What happened to those complaints, and why weren't they paid attention to?
Well, so I've spoken to several aviation experts about that, including a former director of the FAA Office of Investigations. This is a NASA-administered database that allows for anonymous self-reporting of issues by pilots and flight crews. And basically, in those reports, we say there are 5. Really, one of them was just simply a pilot who was complaining about the information surrounding the MCAS system. So not really an in-flight issue at all. So now you're down to 4. Of those, 2 of those described a nose-down situation where after they set the autopilot, the plane dipped in altitude. The issue here is that MCAS, the system that is believed to have failed or malfunctioned in Lion Air, isn't active when autopilot is active. Activating the autopilot deactivates MCAS. So it would be an unrelated issue. And even in those transcripts, if you read the narratives, the pilots don't rule out the possibility of operator error, simply setting the autopilot incorrectly, as they were also relatively new to that airplane. So, you know, I don't know how much weight you really can pay to 4 or 5 complaints, you know, over the course of a year and 100,000 plus flight hours. It sounds, at least right now, that those complaints may be an apples to oranges comparison.
Gotcha.